Hello everyone, and welcome to this introduction to HTMX. In this session we're going to be seeing what HTMX is, and also we're going to be going through a basic introduction about what HTTP is, Ajax, etc. And also we will see a bit how you can integrate this with Rather Studio and which solutions you could develop leveraging HTMX and Rather Studio. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Zapater, and I'm a pre-sales consultant engineer in Embarcadero. I want to leave clear that this presentation I was asked to do, it's 100% from my personal opinion. So I'm not representing Embarcadero in this regard. And even though we're pretty much aligned, of course, about how we can see the technology, etc., this HTMX session is purely my personal opinion. This is the agenda. I mean, it's pretty much each slide here in a bullet point. But yeah, we're going to see an introduction to HTMX. Then we will talk a bit about web broker. We will do a fairly lengthy demo. We will compare HTMX with other JS front ends, as in pros and cons, etc. Some use cases, and then some extra bits for how you can spice things up with HTMX. And if we have the time, we will do Q&A at the end. Okay, so we're going to start very basic. If you're familiar with web development, probably this is going to be too basic for you. But it's important sometimes to just remind ourselves and come back to the basics to understand all the technology that lays on top of the foundational concepts of, in this case, web development. So what is HTTP? Well, HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol and is the foundation of data communication on the web. It defines how messages are formatted and transmitted and how web servers and browsers should respond to various commands. So it's pretty much the communication protocol used for nearly everything, really. So the most fundamental communication protocol on the internet. With HTTP, we can have, well, theoretically 4 or 5, but there are some extra ones. But anyway, the basic methods used for HTTP are get, post, put, and patch, and delete. When you access, for example, a website, so you type the website or you Google something, then you're going to send a GET request to that web server. So you request a specific URL, and then the server returns most of the times just an HTML. Then we have the post request, what means that we're going to create something. This is also quite common if you're even with plain HTML. For example, if you're familiar with basic web development, a form, usually you send a post request when you fill a form, a contact form, for example, we're saying to the server, hey, here are the details. So it's not just a GET request where we're requesting something. In this case, we're sending as well some data in some sort of form to the server. Then we have the other ones that are not as common as in basic HTML. Usually they're more related with REST APIs or other types of development. We have put and patch. These two, I put them together because well, if you're familiar with web development, you probably know that there's always a lot of discussion and confusion regarding this and how people implement them. Theoretically, put and patch are for updating values in the server. So we have post, that was for creating. But in case we want to modify something, we send a put or a patch request to the backend. We're not going to get into the differences between these because we could spend a whole hour talking about that. So then we have delete. That is very self-explanatory. We send a request to the server saying, hey, delete whatever. And then the request, HTTP request flow, very basic stuff too. We have the client, that could be a browser or any service that sends an HTTP request to the server. We need to remember that the request is not just what we see, let's say the URL, or even if it's a post or a put, is not also the body that we're sending. An HTTP request also has headers. And that's very important because that's usually where the security stuff lives. For example, all the cookies, also information about your browser, or if you're using a REST API and you need to authenticate with a, I don't know, JSON web token or something, all that needs to be in the header. And then the server processes that request and sends back a response. The response will contain a status code, and also headers that we could resend the same ones we got, or we can add our extra ones. We have validation stuff like e-tags or something like that. All that could be should be added in the header as well. And the status code, which is the probably, if you're not familiar with web development, you've heard about, of course, 404, which is not found. Well, that's a status code of a response. But the standard one is a 200, which is cool. It's okay. So 200, everything went fine. Here's the response. And then we have, for example, 201, which is created. So when we send a post request, the server should return a 201. And there is this is a standardized. You can find on the internet all the status codes and what they mean. Excuse me. If you hear me coughing, I do apologize, but I have a cold, so I'm not in my best shape at the moment. Okay, and I also want to clarify that responses could be pretty much anything. For a website, usually it's an HTML, but of course could be a JSON, could be an image, could be a file, could be pretty much anything. It's up to the server, and based on the request we send, what we're gonna get in return. And AJAX, probably you've heard that as well. It stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So that's AJAX, even though XML is not as popular as it used to. And nowadays, pretty much everything is JSON, but it stayed in the name. So, and what it does is just an extra functionality to HTTP requests, but these ones are being done asynchronously in the background. So how it works, a user interacts with a page. So for example, it clicks a button, and then JavaScript sends a request to the server behind the scenes. So it doesn't fully reload the page. The server processes the request and sends back the data. So, and then with JavaScript, we update the web page without reloading the entire page. So it's pretty much exactly an HTTP request, but it's done asynchronously and without blocking the UI for the user. In this way, for example, one of the benefits is that we can provide a much smoother user experience because we don't need to reload the whole page every time something changes. We can do a more surgical update to just a specific table or a specific panel or whatever. Also reduces the server load a lot because it doesn't need to be constantly regenerating a whole HTML page or returning in case we have dynamic HTML. It's not static, but yeah, it's a more concise, specific request. And the problems usually are that, well, of course, you need to know JavaScript to be able to leverage this approach, and often leads to complex and error-prone code. Because I mean, if you've been developing with JavaScript, you know that it's not the easiest experience, and the nature of the language that is not typed, and it's not easy. So you need to be very, very careful about how you structure your code, because you can end up with very complex applications when you need to send a lot of requests, etc. Okay, so what's HTMX? Reading from the website, we have HTMX that allows you to access AJAX, CSS, transitions, WebSockets, and servers send events directly in HTML using attributes, so you can build modern user interfaces with the simplicity and power of hypertext. So what does this mean? It means that if you've developed with JavaScript, all the HTML stays in one file, and then all the JavaScript, well, you can put it between script tags inside the same HTML, but usually you're going to put all your JavaScript in a different file. With HTMX, what we do is like we leverage exactly the same approach that HTML already offers using hypermedia, and we define attributes inside each tag. So for example, we have a button, we can put JavaScript and events and behaviors directly inside the button without the need of hooking that event from JavaScript and add a listener, etc., etc. I want to leave clear that HTMX is JavaScript, really. So it's just what it does is like it's like syntactic sugar that adds you or makes your life easier. But behind the scenes, what it's doing is pretty much converting all these tags, etc., to real vanilla JavaScript. In case you like memes, as I do, HTMX is a great source of memes because it has taken the world a bit by storm. Not a lot of people like it. I personally do. Usually people that won't like it are front-end developers because HTMX kind of removes the concept of front-end development and brings back everything to the back-end as it used to many years ago, but now with a much modern approach. And so now a back-end developer, when uses HTMX, it becomes pretty much a full-stack developer. And HTMX is great, the community is brilliant, and you can have a lot of fun. I disagree with the concept that it doesn't look professional just because they create a lot of memes. I do like memes. Anyway, this is one of them. You can find plenty of them, even in their website, not only on Reddit or the communities. Some of the key features of HTMX is that, as I said, it uses standard HTTP requests. So it uses AJAX, really. We have server-side rendering with dynamic updates. So we have this benefits we were talking about earlier. This got very popular back in the day with jQuery when it became the standard for development because it made this very easy. Also, the JavaScript standards back then were much messier. Nowadays, you can pretty much do the same thing with that you could do with jQuery now with vanilla JavaScript. But still, this HTMX follows, at least for me, follows pretty much the same concept. It's like technology that you could already, or approaches that you could already achieve. It makes them easier to maintain and to read. We can also do partial page updates without full reload, but in a very easy way. And one of my favorite reasons is that it's fully backend agnostic. What does it mean? That HTMX is not tied to any language in the backend. You can use HTMX with Delphi. You can use HTMX with Go. You can use HTMX with Ruby on Rails, with PHP, with Python. It doesn't really matter. As long as the backend returns what HTMX expects, you're good to go. Some of the benefits is like extremely lightweight. And on the web space, this really matters. People are very obsessed with initial payloads, and HTMX is roughly 15 kilobytes minimized and unzipped. And just as reference, for example, Vue, just the foundation library of Vue is 14 kilobytes. Probably, if you're not coming from the web space, you will think that this difference is ridiculous. We're talking at the kilobyte level, but trust me, 1 kilobyte can make a big difference in the web space, and developers are really trying to push each kilobyte to the limit. My favorite one is like it has 0 dependencies. No dependencies whatsoever. You just include a script tag in your header and you're good to go. Why is this important? If you've developed for web using pretty much any technology, like React, Vue, Angular, even Laravel or PHP, you name it. Once you do the first scaffolding of your project, you're going to have an insane amount of dependencies out of the box. And we haven't even started coding yet. So all those dependencies at first, it can look like an upside, thinking, okay, I have all this functionality and I didn't have to do anything. But the problem is in the long term. Once you need to start updating these libraries and then you start to have discrepancies between them, one version is not compatible with the other. And it can get messy very, very quickly, mostly when as your project grows, because you're going to add more dependencies to your project. In this case, on the front end, we will have only one dependency, which is HTMX. All our dependencies will be dealt with in the backend. Reduces complexity of client-side JavaScript, because now we don't have much JavaScript going on the front end. And also maintains a familiar HTML-centric approach. As I mentioned, it uses, as we will see in a second, it uses the HTML tags themselves to hook little attributes for HTMX. Okay, HTMX versus traditional Ajax. Simplifies Ajax by embedding behavior directly in HTML. No need for complex JavaScript. Everything is declarative in HTML. So we see let's see an example. Here we can see a very basic code. We have two tags. We have a button and we have a div. And as we can see here, we have the HX get, which is not HTML standard attribute. But every time you see something HX, it means that it's HTMX. And in this case, we're saying to this button, hey, whenever you get clicked, send an AJAX request to this endpoint. And then we're aiming to HX target, saying, and whatever comes from this endpoint, put it inside target. And the only thing we need to do is define where that target is. In this case, it's this ID. If you haven't developed at all whatsoever, this is ID. Defining an ID, this is a standard on HTML. This is used for CSS primarily, and also for JavaScript for identifying, let's say, components in your application. So once we identify in a unique way something in our website, then we can target it from HTMX. Of course, we can do exactly the same thing with JavaScript. If we follow a traditional approach, we're going to end up with this code. We have at the top, we can see that we have our HTML tags. We have our button. In this case, we need to identify it as well with ID, my button. And then we have the div, where whatever we get from the server will be put in. And then we have our script tag that, as I mentioned earlier, could be in the same HTML file, but usually JavaScript lives in different files. And in this case, what we're doing, we're using vanilla JavaScript. We get an element by ID, in this case, my button, and then we add a listener. I say, okay, on click. And then whenever it's been clicked, we fetch from endpoint. And then whenever that AJAX request has been fulfilled, we need to get the text from the response. And then we get from that text, we need to put it in the element by ID result, and we change the inner HTML. As you can see, yeah, same functionality, but you just need to compare the code. We have two lines here where we embedded all the business logic right there. And the bit that I really like is like you don't need to spread your code around in your application. You just need to put everything inside your properties and attributes. As you can imagine, there are plenty of different attributes and triggers and listeners, etc. So HTMX is very powerful, although not overwhelming, I have to say. You have a QR code up there, which is for the documentation of HTMX. You can easily read through the whole documentation in one day, maybe a couple of days. And you are going to end up using just a handful of all these attributes. It's not like you're going to need to know absolutely everything. But one of the most used ones, or the most popular ones that you're going to see in tutorials and some documentation, you have hx get, post, put, delete. So we're coming back to the HTTP requests. You can define right there the nature of the request you're going to send to the endpoint. Then we have to target what we want to do with whatever the server returns. Then we have hx swap, we will see in the demo how what it does. But what you can define is, for example, that I want to replace only the inner HTML. I want to replace the whole HTML tag. For example, if it's a div, I want to replace the whole div with whatever the server returns. You can append the stuff, for example, before the end, in case if you have a very long table and you don't want to be returning from the server the whole table every time. You can just define that the post request returns only the new line, and you can add it at the end of a div. Multiple ways of swapping and to make it more optimal and optimized. And then HX boost, that is very common as well, to add more progressive enhancement for links and forms. Not mandatory, but take a look at it because it's quite common to see it. And then we have triggers. For example, you can define an HX trigger. It specifies an events that will trigger the request. For example, click, change, load, or you can even create your custom events. On the button we saw earlier, that example, I was a bit cheeky because that behind the scenes, HTMX hooks automatically an HX trigger on click on buttons, because I mean 99% of times the events linked to a button are going to be on click. So HTMX just does that for you automatically. But for example, if you want to do something more exotic, like a hover or something like that on a button, you need to define a trigger. But again, that will live directly in your button. You don't need to put this code somewhere else. And you can even define very declarative triggers. For example, every 2 seconds, trigger this. So it doesn't matter interaction of the user. Just execute this every 2 seconds. There's plenty of documentation about how you can declaratively define, because it's so easy to read, really. You see every 2 seconds, execute this, full stop. And also you can define listeners, like for example, for before request, after swap. This is a bit more advanced stuff. But again, all these tags, all these attributes will be on your standard HTML tags. To compare very quickly, I don't want to really start a fight about what framework is better or why HTMX is better than other frameworks. I think it's not the whole point of this. We live in a world that really you have to choose one side, and then automatically you're against all the rest. And I've heard a lot of hate of people saying that because HTMX is very nice and refreshing, then automatically you hate all the rest of frameworks, and I honestly don't believe that. It makes sense for a lot of projects to use something not as complicated as full-blown JavaScript frameworks. But just some benefits. For example, on React, Vue, Angular, and Svelte, you name it, you can put the JS framework of the week. We have the source of truth is very tricky to handle. If you're not familiar with it, it's usually called the state management. And it gets quite complex because if you think about it, you have 2 different projects that the only way of communicating between each other usually is JSON. So you have your front-end website, and then you have your back-end service. And usually your back-end is going to store all the data in some sort of database, but then the front-end needs to store that data as well. So you need to be very careful about keeping those in sync. So you end up with 2 states. And to deal with this on React, you can use React hooks if your application is not too complex. But usually you will end up using Redux or Pinia on Vue or Vuex, it was the previous one. But yeah, I've been working in web development and state management on the front end. It gets very tricky. Complexity. These frameworks that came to make our lives easier have got so complex that the learning curve to get into these is really overwhelming. And sometimes to make a small project like a simple web app to show or to offer to your customers, for example, with a little information about your main software, it feels a bit overkill. Once you scaffold your project and the amount of stuff that is already there just to create a couple of pages, it's quite complex. And performance, some people could argue about this, but because they're so heavy on JavaScript, depending on the device you're running into, for example, all mobiles, etc., they don't look as snappy as they should, because the client the one that has to be dealing with virtual DOM and stuff like that. But how do we solve all this with HTMX? Well, we don't have complex state management anymore, because your source of truth is in the backend. So full stop. Your database is the source of truth, or whatever system you use to store your data. And even if you need to store some sort of state on your front end, you can stuff all that in your HTML directly. So your HTML is your state in case you need to store something. But 99% of times you're going to have your source of truth on the back end, as it used to be many years ago. It's very easy to reason about because no need to state syncing, which is seriously a big headache, at least it was for me. And simple to use for small to medium-sized projects. The learning curve is very, very, very low, because literally you can be in a few hours, you can be up and running, prototyping stuff already. And server-driven approach nowadays, with the type of servers we have, and we have the cloud, etc., it's completely different scenario than 10 years ago when React was announced. Just let that sink in. React is 10 years old. So the problems we had on the web 10 years ago are not the same problems that we're having nowadays. So bringing things back to the server, mostly for small, mid-sized projects, at least for me, it makes a lot of sense. We're going to be talking about Web Broker as well. Web Broker is a framework within Rad Studio that enables developers to create web applications and web services. It's not very popular. Not a lot of people know about it, and just that's the reason why I wanted to have a slide about it. And it supports the development of RESTful services, SOAP services, and many other stuff. And it's quite cool, and it gets along very well with HTMX as well. And actually, we're going to be using Web Broker to create the demos today. The key features are that it handles HTTP requests and responses, supports the standard web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. It scales quite nicely as well. So if you're going to have a serious amount of users connecting to your backend, I mean, you can even scale that horizontally if you want to, if you put in some Docker containers, but again, not the topic for this presentation. And Web Broker itself is a set of has a set of different components. We have the web module that is a container for web actions. It's pretty much like the router if you're familiar with other frameworks. Then we have web action items that defines the type of request, so the method, if it's going to be a get, post, etc. Then we have a web request, and then we have the response. We will see in the demo all this, and it will make much more sense. Okay, let's get our hands dirty and let's start coding. Okay, so here we are on my computer, and I have Rad Studio open down here. To create a new web server application, well, in my case, I have a shortcut here because I use it regularly, but if you don't, you can come here to File, New, and in Order, Web, you will find two options. One is to create a SOAP server, which is not the case, and we're going to choose Web Server. Here you can, we're going to choose Linux as well because, I mean, let's be honest, if you're going to deploy in the cloud at some point, Linux is pretty much the standard nowadays. You can choose between 3 modes. You could even create, if you want to, like an Apache module, but I usually use a standalone console applications. because, for example, if you're going to create a Docker image, it's usually easier to handle. So the console application lives inside the container. This is the default port. It's going to be running 8080. You can change this, not a problem. Just be sure that this port is available in your computer before creating this project. And once we click finish, the wizard creates the project for us. First thing we're going to do, let's save this. I'm going to save it, say this desktop. Never save your projects in the desktop. Don't do like me. Let's name this code gear. And let's leave the default names as should do. Okay. Let's analyze a bit all the files that have been created. We have, this is the project source code. So we have our units, and this is, you will see in a second, the assistant that will be launched in the console. So we're going to have a few commands that we can execute. We have the server constants, which are pretty much just the text that you will see in the console application. Of course, you can change this. And the important bit, which is the web module unit. If we access the visual bits of it, you will see that it looks pretty much like a data module, but it's a web module. And here we have the actions. The actions are, let's say, the endpoints that is web server is going to be handling. In case, hopefully you remember that we were talking about earlier, the different types of methods. So you can see here, we can have get, post, put, delete, etc. So in this way, you can customize each endpoint. In this case, we have just one by default. That is the root of the website. And we have an action method assigned to this, or an event to be more precise, and it just returns a very bare bones HTML. Just to be sure that this is working, let's execute it. And as you can see here, this is the console application. Now we have to type start, and our application is running in port 8080. Just to be sure that this is working, let's access localhost 8080, and off we go. We have our very basic website. Okay, let's start to do something interesting with this. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new unit, and we will see in a second why. Let's save this. Let's name it as HTML, templates. If I can type correctly. Cool. And here we're going to be defining a bunch of consts. They're going to be multi-line string literals, because we're on version 12.1 here, so we can use these. Of course, if you're going to develop a more complex real-world application, I would encourage you to use some sort of template engine. You can use multiple ones available out there. But for this demo, which is primarily focused on HTMX, constants are going to be just fine. So first we need a HTML base template. And in case you haven't used multi-line string literals, you define them with 3 quotes. And here I'm going to be a bit lazy. I'm going to copy and paste a basic scaffolding, because this is very standard basic HTML scaffolding. The only thing is a script tag that is pulling HTMX. In this case is 2.02, which is the latest version when I'm recording this video. But of course you can replace this with whatever you need. And let's create inside the body just an H1. Let's assign this already an ID of header, because we're going to use that in a bit. And let's say hello code gear. If I can type. God, I'm particularly clumsy today. Okay, something I usually do as well, change the format of the files to UTF-8. And you're probably wondering why. Well, because now we can use emojis, and that's very important. So now I can put my trusty flamenco dancer there, and we can even see it right there. Cool. Just to be sure that everything is working, let's execute this again. And now, well, actually we need to assign this somewhere because I haven't assigned it to our endpoint. We need to add users here. HTML templates, and down here instead this content this request, this action, you can see here we're getting the request, we're getting the response, so we can manipulate this or access information that is coming through in the request. We will see an example later. For the time being, we're going to only replace this basic HTML with our HTML based template. Constant, and this should be good to go. Something I'm also going to do, because now every time we execute this we need to type start, and trust me, if you're debugging something it gets quite annoying. So what I usually do is I come to the project code, and down here, right here, what I do is I define a compile directive. So I say if we are on debug, and then we close the if, and here where we can do now this one is start server server, and we need to end if Antonio. Okay, so what this is going to do is just every time we execute the application it will start the server, but only if we're on debug mode. So that way we will avoid typing start all the time. So now when we execute, it runs automatically in port 8080. Cool. If we come back here, now we have our little flamenco dancer right there. Brilliant. Okay, next stop. Let's start adding some HTMX stuff, because so far, I'm going to close this one, we haven't done anything HTMX wise. So we're going to create here a button. There's going to be a button, and let me think. Okay, we're going to use a get, and let's name the endpoint hello world, and we're going to target the ID header, and let's put a click me, and let's close the button. So what this is going to do, this is pretty much the example we've seen in the slides. We're going to call the endpoint hello world using a get method, and the result that we will be getting is going to be included in the header. So we need to create now the endpoint hello world, and to do that, simply we come here and we define a new action. We're going to name this hello world, and the path info, which is the URI, is going to be hello world, and the event or the action, we're going to get the response and the content of the response. For this example, we're not going to define a template. Let's say just hello world. And let's add an emoji, of course. Let's search for the earth. There you go. And now we should be able, oh yeah, because I haven't changed this one to UTF-8, it's just warning me that I'm using not valid character. We just click yes, let's change it to UTF-8, and now we're good to go. Okay, now if we execute this, now we have the button, and if we click it, now we have the hello world that has been called to the backend through an AJAX request. If we come to the dev tools and we come to network, you will see that it has sent a hello world request, and if we come to analyze it, the response has been the hello world, and then has been replaced in the target we defined. Okay, so we have a very bare bones hello world, but let's try to do something a bit more interesting, which could be, let's say, okay, let's add a counter. It's going to be an integer, and let's initialize this on create, and every time we click, we're going to increment it, and let's just add here at the end, and let's say f counter to string. Okay, so now every time we click, our field will be incremented by 1, and we will concatenate that to the end of the string. So now we're gonna have a more dynamic example, because so far we could click that only once. Cool. Okay, so as you can see, a bunch of requests going to our backend, but we're not refreshing the page. We're replacing only this bit right here. Okay, again, very basic example, but we can do, of course, way more than this. We could spend hours just playing around with this, but let's make something slightly more interesting, which is let's add a little form, and then we will be able to send some data to our backend, grab it, and then return it on our website. Let's create, let's call this submit, and you will understand it in a second. We're gonna keep using our trusty multi-line string literals, and this is going to be a form. Well, actually, we need to create one first up here. Form, and this is going first. Let's make it disabled. So we're going to request an edit to the backend, so it will return us the activated form. So in this way, you're going to be able to verify that we can do validation as well at the backend level. So this is, we're going to replace the whole HTML. And let's close the tag form. And now we need to create a couple of fields. Well, actually, technically one, and one is going to be a button. This is all just a standard HTML. Of course, to leverage this kind of approach, you need to know at least the very basic HTML standards. But honestly, it's so easy to learn and so basic, and the internet is just full of content about how to create this this kind of basic HTML tags. We're going to see this in a second. We're going to have this input disable, and we're going to have this another, which is going to be type submit, which is going to be a button, and the value is going to be edit. Okay, so far let's leave it like this, and then once we see what this is doing, I think it will make more sense the next part. So now we have the field set. We can see here is defined by a group, and we have an edit, and then we have a button that we can click. And at the moment, of course, it's just returning the default endpoint, which is not what we want to. And we need to return the submit one. So what we want to do is we want to replace exactly the same form, but we're going to edit a few things. In this case, the form we will return is going to send a post request to the endpoint's submit, and is going to be edit activated. Let's say we're going to remove the disable property, and then this should be the same. Let's add just into the button value, let's say submit, and here let's add just an emoji, like a very basic one. Okay, Now we need to create the endpoints for this. And to do so, we've already done it. We just need to come here to actions. We're going to create 2 endpoints. One is going to be edit, this is /edit, and the other one is going to be summit /summit. And now the actions are going to be, this one is going to be that simple. This is going to be just the no, sorry, this is cedit. It's not csummit. Cedit, Antonio. And so yeah, this is going to be the edited in edit mode form, and we need another one, which is going to be the csummit, which is once we've finished. And this is going to be pretty much this. So same form exactly as the one we have, but we're going to be adding down here a tag, which is we use for documentation, but for this kind of example, it's going to be more than enough. QBD. Okay. So in this case, we return the edit, and in the other one, so far, we're going to just return the summit. We will see in an example later how we can extract that edit value that is going to come in the post request, which is going to be the final result. But just for the time being, let's see if this works. So at the moment, the only thing we need to do is just to verify that when we click edit, this form changes. And it does change. So now the edit is activated, and then we can type, and then we can click submit. But you can say, but Antonio, this looks very ugly. This Times New Roman is killing me. And I cannot but agree with you. So for formatting HTML, we need to know some CSS, or we can be clever and use multiple libraries that are out there that are going to do most of the heavy lifting for us. I personally like one a lot that is called Pico CSS. Of course, you can use Bootstrap or any other, or Tailwind or whatever you feel more comfortable with. But I do like Pico CSS because it's very semantic. It doesn't imply using a lot of classes, because in most of the time you need to add a bazillion classes to each component in your HTML. And in this case, because it leverages the types that are already, or the nature of the attribute, for example, an H1 will be automatically formatted as an H1. Same thing for inputs, for buttons, etc. And you only need to do some very, very minor adjustments to use containers, so your content is responsive, etc. But just as a quick example, I only added the CSS using a CDN. So now if we execute this, I haven't added not even a class to any of the components. If we execute this again, now still we need some formatting when it comes to containers, but hey, I haven't done anything, and I'm already getting a much better looking website. So the only thing I'm going to do to have this is slightly better looking is to define a container. To define a container, we simply need to come here, and we can create class container. And this is going to end here under the form. And let's indent this. And this, theoretically, it should give us a slightly better looking with margins and stuff like that. There you go. So now this is slightly more responsive, and it looks much better. But as you can see, even the font size and everything, it's already there for us. And Pico CSS is ridiculously small. Like I'm talking about kilobytes. Okay. So now when we click edit, we can edit our input. We can click submit, but nothing happens. So we get this %s, which is what we defined in our template. But the plan is that whatever I type here, once I click submit, it goes into this tag down here. So to do that, if you're familiar with Delphi or Rudder Studio, hopefully you know the answer, which is just pretty much coming here to what is submit here. We just need to we need to create a variable to extract from the response. Here's the request, content fields, values. Because HTMX for us, when we send a post request, everything that is, all the values inside that form are included automatically. So our backend is receiving all those values already with whichever name we assign to those inputs or radio buttons or whatever. In this case, we have the template that we have an input that the name is edit. So the value that is included inside this edit is going to be inside this array here. So we have that value. Of course, we could do some validation here. We could check if it's empty, if it's not empty, if it's an email. You could verify if it's an email form. But in this case, just for the demo, the only thing we're going to be doing is to we're going to get the string format, and we're going to say, okay, in the csubmit template, we're going to replace lResponse. So what it's going to do is whatever we add there is going to replace the %s with that value. Let's execute this again. And there you go. There you have it. So we didn't need to, as you could see, we didn't, not even once we need to refresh anything. Everything is happening behind the scenes. If you're not familiar with HTMX, I will encourage you to check all these requests because they are very, very enlightening about how the technology works. Because, for example, you can see here that when we clicked edit, we're getting a whole form, and that's being replaced behind the scenes automatically, and you don't even notice anything. So everything is battery smooth, very, very snappy. So this is a very nice way to give your users an SPA5, which is a single page application, but without the headache that implies of having two fully decoupled front-end and back-end projects. This approach, I mean, of course, this is very basic. I keep saying this, but we need to keep some things security-wise in mind. For example, I could now here and inject some script if I wanted to. But of course, that's security that you need to implement by yourself. But for example, if you want to avoid script injection, you could simply escape the value we're getting from the edit. You would simply need to use TNet encoding. Actually, I will need to add this in the users. If I'm not mistaken, it was systemnet encoding. Yes. And now here we can get this and say HTML encode and the response, and we just simply reassign this here, and we're good to go. Now we're going to be sure that all this is escaped, so no one could inject any JavaScript or anything else in our application. Not that it wouldn't matter really, because our backend is going to be a binary compile, so injecting, but for security reasons, it's always a good practice to escape. So now if I send here script and let's say console log hi, and we close the script. If I send this, it's been escaped, and just plain text. Okay, so this has been the very, very basic demo about HTMX, and let's keep going with the slides. You can find here blog series we created about RAD Studio and HTMX. So far, we have 3 different blog posts. You have the QR code to access each one, but you can access blogs.embarcadero.com and search for HTMX and you will find them. We're planning on expanding this series in the future, but so far the demo we just saw has been extracted pretty much from this series. You have all the code available as well on our GitHub repository, so feel free to clone that repo and play around with it. Because I like to be as unbiased as possible, I want to specify in which cases HTMX makes sense, because even though for most of the small to medium-sized projects, HTMX works just great, it's not a solution for every project out there. So, as I mentioned, HTMX fits very nicely in small to medium-sized projects or projects where server-side rendering is preferred. So, I've already mentioned in this presentation that if you're familiar with a server-side rendering approach like PHP or something else, this is going to be easier to pick up. If your team has a strong backend expertise, also HTMX will make your development much faster. And applications where simplicity and maintainability are priorities. But of course, there are cases where HTMX, even though possible to be used, I wouldn't recommend. So, for example, large-scale applications, highly interactive SPAs. For example, if you want to create, let's say, like a crypto broker platform thing, where you're going to see a lot of different values updating constantly, so multiple bits of your DOM being updated. You could use HTMX, but probably in that scenario, it makes more sense to use front-end development. Projects that require advanced client-side state management as well. This one is pretty much, it goes together with the latest option as well, which is projects that require offline support. That's one of the main drawbacks that a lot of people don't like about HTMX, is like it fully relies on the backend. So if you don't have the access to the internet, your application won't work. That being said, programming a good progressive web app with full offline support, that's very difficult, at least from my previous experience. Because of course there's a lot of things to keep in mind. So things that can synchronize automatically once you're back online. So if you're planning on making the next, I don't know, Google Docs, then HTMX is not for you. You're gonna have to use different technology. But those are really the kind of large scale projects that I'm talking about. And situations where heavy client-side interactivity is needed. Again, following the same example, if you want to create like a crypto portal with a bunch of information being shown and updated constantly every second, then that's going to be a lot of requests sent to your server, and then multiplied by each client connected to your application. That could be maybe not the best scenario to use HTMX. But if you want to create, let's say, like a CRM, an ERP, stuff like that, HTMX is just perfect. It scales brilliantly, and you can have hundreds, if not thousands of users connected at the same time. Spicing up HTMX. I know I've been saying a lot during this presentation that you don't need JavaScript, and that's true. You can still do most of the stuff, if not all of the stuff, using just HTMX. You're going to end up facing situations where it makes more sense to use JavaScript. Let's say, for example, if you have a notification system, you know, this kind of toast notifications you see on the top right of your screen, you can pull those directly as HTML from your server, but if you want to hide them, So after 5 seconds, let's say that notification we wanted to be hidden. That's something that the client could deal with, really. We don't need to send an extra request to the server to just hide that notification. In those cases, I would recommend you 2 very popular JavaScript libraries. One is HyperScript. It has a very tight integration with HTMX because, I mean, it's same creators, so they get along very, very well. It's an event-driven library. It's very, very lightweight and is non-intrusive at all. You can use it just very surgically in the parts you need this kind of interactivity that is purely going on in the front end, and is focused on simple and declarative syntax. You can see an example down there. Just as a quick explanation, all the JavaScript it's been, again, in the HTML tags. We use _equal, and we follow a very, very declarative syntax, as you can see here. Even if you're not familiar with HyperScript, you literally read what's going on. So in this case, we have a button that is a toggle, and we have an ID that is target. As you can see, follows pretty much the same convention as we've seen before. And in this case, the class is hidden. This div is hidden. So when we click the button, we toggle hidden on target. So what this is going to do is going to remove the hidden class on target. Off we go. So again, this is very nice and very easy to read. And if you check the documentation, it's so simple. You have a QR code there in case you want to access and check it out. And the other one that is very popular among HTMX developers is Alpine.js. Again, super lightweight, very, very small. It follows reactive data binding, declarative syntax, very small learning curve, like very small. We're talking about 14 attributes, I think, and just a handful of events. And it follows a component-based approach. I really like. They have this new thing called Alpine components, and it's a very, very interesting approach. So you can have and it gets along very well with template engines. So take a look at that. If you've been developing using Vue, this is going to resonate a lot because it follows a lot of the same patterns. So for example, here we have a little state, which is show as equals to false. We store the data. So this would be the state of the application inside divs, which I love. And this example is @click. This is the way you define events. And as I said, if you've developed with Vue, this is going to look very familiar to you. And we just toggle really the button. The value of show on click. And then here we have content that has been shown or not based on the value of show. As you can see, very easy to read as well. We have these 2 examples that they follow exactly the same functionality, but I just wanted to use a very simple example about how to achieve this kind of interactivity on the front end without using HTMX. Again, QR code, take a look. You can choose whichever you prefer. Just as an extra note, I just forgot to mention, HyperScript is not in version in production yet. There's 0.9 something, so it theoretically is not finished, even though I know a lot of people are using it already. But just keep in mind that it's still in beta, but soon, hopefully, it will be a release candidate and potentially GA. Here are some links. It's pretty much some of the QR codes I've been using in the presentation, but also this first one, first and second one are the ones I wanted to talk about. The first one is a case study. It's a company that migrated from React to HTMX. They use, I think, Django for the backend. And it's a real world application that has been fully migrated from React to HTMX, and they talk about the problems they faced, things that are working much better, etc. It's a very unbiased case study that it's a fairly short video. I think it's like 20-30 minutes, really worth watching. HTMX has a book that is free. You can download it here. Well, actually, not download it. You have to pay. The online version is free. It's hypermedia.systems. If you want to support the project, you can purchase the offline version, and you can get an ebook or a PDF, and they even have a real book that you can purchase on Amazon, I think. I don't remember, but anyway. And also the rest of the links are pretty much basic links we've been already seeing in the presentation. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Hope you found this introduction to HTMX interesting. And let's go to the Q&A and see if we have any questions.
Excellent session. We were just discussing in the background, we're running a bit late, so should we do the Q&A? And you know what, Antonio, I'm going to make you do a little bit of Q&A. Your camera's not on. Is that deliberate? Maybe you're trying to hide. So we're just going to get him to put his camera on. It might not work, in which case we'll get him audio only. Oh, well, unfortunately, it says your audio is not working. We can't see you, so you can talk if your microphone's working. This might solve the problem. Should we do the Q&A?
Hello.
We can hear you. You're a little bit quiet. Let me turn you up a bit.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
There you go. We put you at max now.
Okay.
I don't know why, but your camera's not working, so you're kind of like a voice from above. So
okay, I do like that.
yeah.
Well,
there you go. Martha's also got you up, so we can actually see your avatar.
At least my avatar. My camera is on. I don't know why it's not been shown. Weird.
Do you know what? It happens all the time. Don't worry too much about it. Although we're running a bit late, and I apologize to Yaroslav, who is already in our studio in the back there, but there were some questions. Let me just go to them because I pinned a few. People liking your session, by the way, just FYI.
Brilliant.
Yeah, Adel said HTMX is very interesting. It's the first time I heard about it. So yeah, well, I only heard about it last year, but you and I have spoken quite a lot about it, I think, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly new technology, not that new, because it has been in the making for quite a long time, but now it has got a lot of traction in the last year. And I know that with the JavaScript space is mental. The amount, I mean, pretty much you get a new framework every week. So it's quite tricky to follow, but at least this one is quite refreshing when you compare it to, because the new JavaScript frameworks, what they're doing is pretty much the same thing the other ones are doing, but slightly better. But this one follows a completely different approach. It's very refreshing to see something simple again when it comes to web development.
Yeah, I mean, that's what struck me, actually, that it actually is very easy to get the grips with, because Gary Shelton said complexity plus 10. He was talking about JavaScript in general, and he was saying, I'm just starting to get started with web development. The abundance of different frameworks is just daunting. It
is. I cannot but agree. And that's why I do like HTMX, because it's a new approach. It's a new kid on the block, but at least it brings something new on the table that is easy to follow, and that you don't need to spend weeks to understand the hell your first boilerplate means. Because, as I said also during the presentation, something that people don't realize is that React is more than 10 years old already. So people keep thinking, yeah, React is is this new technology that you need to use for the web, but it's 10 years old, and the web is very different nowadays, and the problems we had 10 years ago are different to nowadays. The technology is different as well. And ironically enough, on the React space, they are coming back to the server, because now a very popular framework is Next.js. So they came up with this new concept, which is server-side components So it's pretty much like closing the circle. So the problem, the problems that were meant to fix, now they've been solved with solutions that existed 10 years ago. So it's yeah, it's very complex. That's why I'm really trying to recommend simplicity. Most of people don't need that level of complexity for their applications, and if one day you do, lucky for you, because it means that your application really scaled and you need something bigger than HTMX.
Exactly. And we had a few people mention things like TMS Web Core and stuff like that. I use TMS Web Core myself quite a lot. And one of the things they were saying was, I'm just if you're just a hobbyist, blah, 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 blah. After looking at all that you need to learn, you just avoid web apps. I get that. It can be off-putting. And in fact, that there's a really good YouTuber whose name I can't remember, but he does these like sketches where he pretends to be a particular person. So, a day in the life of a Linux dev and stuff like that. And he did one as a JavaScript senior developer. And it was so funny because he's like, okay, everybody, today we need to learn Next.js. And then everyone's like, oh, okay. And they're having, courses about it. And then he went to lunch and came back. And he came back in the afternoon and goes, what are you doing? They go, oh, we're learning Next.js. It's, oh, no. That was this morning. Now you need to learn.
Yeah,
exactly it,
exactly.
With WebCore, because I'm kind of a little bit of an expert on WebCore myself as well, you can use Next.js with it, but the only reason is because WebCore is producing true HTML and JavaScript. But WebCore is trying to solve one particular thing, and HTMX is trying to solve something else. And similar, but not quite the same. Large WebCore programs are very good because you can just reuse your Delphi code to a certain degree. But it is possible. But I think it's horses of courses. And someone mentioned Horse as well, saying, oh, it's an alternative way of getting web content out via Delphi. And
absolutely.
Horse.
Yeah, Horse is a brilliant little framework. I have more experience with Horse than I have with TMS Web Core. I've used Horse more for developing REST APIs. And the good thing about Horse is that flexible, that you can adapt it to do whatever you want it to do. And it gets along very well with template engines, and using HTMX, you can end up with very, very good web solutions developed with Delphi. Maybe this is a bit of an unpopular opinion, but for creating
and this is how Antonio resigns from Embarcadero.
That's why I specified at the beginning of the presentation. This is all my personal opinions. I don't represent Embarcadero on this event.
Be brave. Just come on, take it.
No, the thing is, I fully respect other solutions like UniGUI or these more rad kind of solutions that follow the standard VCL FMX way of developing applications. But for me in the past, it has been a real headache to do like a proper responsive application. So it's good if you want to just migrate your current desktop application and offer a desktop web app. It's fine. But if you're aiming to mobile, tablets, desktop, any device, it gets very tricky using a visual designer to end up with a good result. At least that's my experience. That's why I know it sounds a bit complex because you need to learn some HTML and some CSS. But if you want to end up with a real equivalent to modern websites, it's really worth the effort. And as I mentioned in the chat, having ChatGPT and these AI tools for this very basic HTML and CSS stuff, it's brilliant to get basic scaffolding for your application.
Yeah, and at Embarcadero, we're always looking into different things that we can do, to kind of reply to people saying, hey, I think Rad Studio should do this and Rad Studio should do that. And, funny enough, AI is one of those topics. What should we do with AI? But also, what can we do to improve the situation with web technologies? And it's something we're actively pursuing at the moment, and looking into how we can make that experience better, because we realize that there is There are better ways of doing it. That's why there is a TMS web core. That's why there is a intraweb. That's why there is a uni GUI, because each one of those frameworks solves a particular problem in their own particular way.
Exactly.
I think all three of them, the ones that I just mentioned, are great for what they do, but there's still room for a different approach in all of those technologies.
Exactly.
And so, you know, that's one of the things we're looking at trying to, you know, move forward with as a company. So Antonio's given his own personal opinion. I'm giving the company line. So.
Exactly. You're way more diplomatic than me.
Well, I always say when I deliberately make sure that whenever I'm doing the broadcast on behalf of the company, people see me wearing the shirt, so they understand I am speaking on behalf of the company. And you know, as well as everybody else, that the company are very generous to me. They do basically trust me to say the right thing, but also I think developers trust me to say the right thing for developers.
Yeah.
I don't try to you know, be a shill, if you see what I mean, like a marketing salesperson type thing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously part of my role, but I am here as a developer relations. So I'm trying to make sure that the company is giving people what they want, and I think we're very good at doing that. And certainly in the last year, we've really, you know, ramped up listening to people and responding to what they want and trying to give them solutions. And HTMX is one of those things that people asked about, and you delivered for sure. So.
Thank you.
Excellent. And you know, Surajit said, "Excellent work, sir." So
thank you very much.
You've got a fan. You've got a fan. All right. Well, we're a bit late. I apologize to people. We're actually running kind of 20 minutes late, but it's worth it. It was a good session. Yaroslav is next. I'm going to say goodbye to Antonio. By the way, we didn't mention what you do in the company.
I'm pre-sales consultant engineer. So pretty much I when a salesperson doesn't know the technical answer for something, they send me the customer, and then we have the nerdy talk.
They send in Antonio. You're like Batman or something.
Exactly.
It's not the police and the mayor can't handle it, so let's call him Batman, and they put a signal up.
Pretty much.
Well, you know, you and I work very closely on all sorts of things. And I get on very well with you. I've got a lot of respect for you. You're a very smart guy. You're very energetic, and I always keep saying to you, slow down, you're working too hard.
Yeah, that's one of my problems.
Yeah, well, you'll learn. Look, if you want to end up with the hair looking like mine, you'll learn to slow down a bit instead. All right, well, thanks a lot, Antonio. I'll speak to you.
My pleasure. Thank you to all the attendees. Bye-bye.